the memories of adults of a certain age, and plenty of today's children for that matter, there is the image of a steam train, with all of its noise and wonder huffing and puffing across the landscape. Steam trains are part of America's collective memory. They are powerful symbols of our country's history, of our progress, past and present. Because their diesel offspring remain hard at work today, pulling trains throughout North Carolina's intricate web of rails. Even now, when we see an engine laboring up a steep grade, our response to trains remains a bit mysterious, cloaked in reminiscence, perhaps connecting us for just an instant to what we perceive as a more easygoing, more comprehensible time. Although it wasn't necessarily an easier time, because whole towns in the 19th and early 20th centuries either thrived or did not, depending on where the tracks were or were not laid.
The actual towns like Lexington and Thomasville, all of them that are dotted along the railroad out here, were actually called tank towns. If you look on the map, they're spaced about 20, 25 miles apart, and they would just simply supply coal and water for steam engines.
Today, we count ourselves fortunate to even be around trains and railroad memorabilia, like during the Rail Days event each June at Spencer Shops near Salisbury. It's early morning at the North Carolina Transportation Museum, located on what was once the Southern Railway's largest steam locomotive repair facility, now operated by the Department of Cultural Resources. Today, diesel engine number 6133 emerges from Spencer Shop's huge roundhouse. First stop is the yard's trusty old turntable. The aged engine is lined up to the correct track and sent off on another day's work, pulling its relatively light load of vintage passenger cars. Southern Railway number 6133, all 16 cylinders and 1,500 horsepower, was born in 1950. At mid-century, the American outlook was strong. By then, the efficiency and speed of diesel had almost completely eclipsed steam. And compared to the ancient puffer bellies, diesel engines seemed, well, sleek and modern.
Okay, 6133,
After 3 decades of hard work, most of it on small North Carolina branch lines, 6133 had earned her rest and was donated to the museum in 1980. The old engine has been restored a couple of times and continues to pull trains of appreciative guests through the museum's 57 acres. There are other opportunities to ride the rails in North Carolina. Thanks to Amtrak's regular passenger service.
Amtrak has both long-distance and corridor service in North Carolina. Our long-distance trains are the Silver Star, which operates between New York and Tampa and Miami, making stops in North Carolina along the way. Of course, we have the 2 corridor trains. The Piedmont operates locally between Charlotte and Raleigh. The Carolinian is Charlotte and New York via Raleigh.
Some cities, like Greensboro, still enjoy daily passenger service. The city has retained and restored the architectural appeal of its station, a style that has all but disappeared from the landscape.
all aboard. Our next station, High Point. High Point is next.
Nearby High Point 2 has made a similar push to restoration.
Thank you, sir.
And other cities are inspired to do the same, with an eye toward the day when passengers once again crisscross our state.
I think corridor trains are very important, and that's where we're seeing our biggest growth. As gas prices get higher and congestion clogs the highways, and flying in those 300 to 500 miles corridors becomes less and less convenient, more and more folks are looking at rail as a viable alternative.
All right, watch step down, sir.
Of course, North Carolina tracks carry rail freight into every corner of the Tar Heel State, thanks to private carriers that traverse its more than 3,600 miles of track. And business is booming.
Hey, Jerry, y'all have a safe trip.
Pull on ahead, Booster, over.
All right.
On a foggy spring morning, a 100-car coal train pulls out of Asheville.
Each car holds about 3 tractor trailers loaded with coal.
I think we're heavy. We're loading all we can load.
2 sets of engines are required to pull and sometimes push the long train up to Ridgecrest. There, the engineer stops the train and balances his heavy load across the crest of the mountain, while the brakes are checked and adjusted for the long, slow descent. It's only 3 miles to Old Fort, as the crow flies, but the oh-so-cautious journey down the mountain covers 13 miles. Goes through 7 tunnels. And takes more than 45 minutes. In places, the train doubles back on itself, so you can not only see where you're going, but where you've been. When the train finally reaches relatively flat land, you can almost hear it sigh with relief as a generous volume of smoke pours from the brakes. On the way down, a jubilant geyser off to the left vaults itself into the fresh mountain air as if to celebrate the train's successful descent, flowing as it used to in the late 19th century, when there was a grand hotel at that spot for the enjoyment of train passengers. Built, unfortunately, a little too close to the tracks, where cinders from a steam engine set it on fire and burned it to the ground in 1903. What is known today as Andrews Geyser remains and is as much a part of Old Fort as their old depot. Nowadays, even electronics gets into railroading, especially at Norfolk Southern's Spencer Classification Yard, or Hump Yard as it's known, in Linwood. It's called a hump yard because of the large hill built in the center, with tracks sloping in every direction. Cars from arriving trains are pushed up the hump, then decoupled, rolled down the incline at 2 miles an hour, sorted by content and destination, and computers switched onto any one of 40 tracks where new trains are being assembled. As they go, the cars are weighed and radar scanned, their speed adjusted by hydraulic brakes built into the tracks. Each one, or 2 of them together, glides slowly toward a new destination. It's easy to imagine your train being pulled by a steam engine. Some of the scenery is the same. There is the rhythmic clickety-clack from the tracks, and the distant sound of a steam whistle, at least in your mind. Meantime, however, it's good to know that riding the rails is something you can still do in North Carolina, that trains and the engines that pull them are not a dying breed, even if they don't look exactly like we might want to remember them.